Hello again, and welcome back to the 3 on NY3 podcast, focused exclusively on New York's new 3rd Congressional District and its race for Congress this year. My name is Andrew Whitman. This is episode 9 of the 3 on NY3 podcast, and it's a special one for a couple of different reasons. First, the decision last week by the New York State Court of Appeals, that's New York's highest court, which ordered the redraw of the state's congressional map. That is obviously going to have a huge impact on the district and the race for Congress. We'll get into the specifics and the impact that that ruling will have not just on the candidates and their campaigns, but also on this podcast. We'll do that on the other side of today's interview. This episode also represents a major milestone for 3 on NY3, the podcast itself. We're going to be speaking with candidate Jon Kaiman, who will become the 6th and final of the current candidates to appear on the program. 3 on NY3 launched on April 5th, 2022. This episode, episode 9, will post on May 3rd, 2022. So within 4 weeks, we will have heard extended comments from all of the current candidates in New York's 3rd District. That's a total of 10 and a half hours of candidate sound that's available here on the 3 on NY3 podcast, and only here, which has to be the largest collection of 3rd District candidate commentary available anywhere, giving you, the voters, the chance to compare and contrast the candidates as never before. That was the main goal in launching this podcast, and frankly will remain one of my proudest achievements as a political journalist. Before we get to Mr. Kaiman, I'm obliged to beg and plead for you, the audience, to help the show. You can do that by subscribing to 3 on NY3 wherever you're watching or listening to it. You can like it, 5-star it, leave a comment, tell a friend about it. And by doing so, you become, with apologies to Bette Midler, the wind beneath the wings of this podcast. Again, apologies, Bet. Now, as I mentioned, I'll have more on the court decision vacating the current congressional district lines in New York State and what's likely to happen both to the current 3rd District and to this podcast that will follow this interview. And that interview is with candidate for Congress and current Deputy Suffolk County Executive Jon Kaiman. Enjoy. Jon Kaiman, current Deputy County Executive in Suffolk County, former North Hempstead Supervisor, and current candidate for Congress in New York's 3rd District. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You've been in public service for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what sparked your passion for public service.
So I've been very involved in what's going on in the world since a very young age. I went to a camp called Camp Thoreau that was kind of about Henry David Thoreau, and we learned about civil disobedience and activity in the public sphere, and it was something that made me curious as I grew older and learned to use my voice and to protest and to stand up and be counted. And as I evolved, and I eventually went to law school and became a lawyer, but I also got very much involved in local campaigns. And I made the choice if I want to get involved in politics and government, do I go to school in Washington, D.C., to law school, or do I go locally? Do I grow from the ground up? And I made the decision to stay where I was. I was at Hofstra University. They invited me to come to the law school there. And so I stayed and decided I was going to pursue law, politics, and government at the very local level and see where it takes me. And I ended up running for office. I managed campaigns. I was Gary Hart's New York State campaign manager when I was in law school. It was a very brief campaign.
Yes, it was. If memory serves, yes.
Yes, but it was a wonderful experience, and through that I met other people and learned one thing after another, and ended up working for others over the years, and really became very much immersed in the world of politics and ultimately government. Right? We start in politics because we believe in something larger than ourselves. We have causes and missions and ideals, and we want to achieve something. But the goal is eventually to have the ability to make those decisions, to be that leader, to make that difference. And so, as I evolved into somebody who became a candidate and then an official, I learned that there's a whole nother piece to this process, and that was governing. And so I am here now, having had many years in the political sphere, understanding the root ideals and underlying principles that drive us, but also understanding the responsibility of governing and being in a position to make those decisions, have an impact on people's lives, take responsibility and be accountable for the people that we serve. And so I am here now running for Congress because I believe that I've been able to synthesize these ideas behind who I am. And we're at a moment in time when it's really important to understand both, so that we can, together with those who are part of my world and walking this journey with me, can do something that's important, which is get this country in a path where we don't seem to be going. I think we need a better path, maybe the one less traveled, but the one we're traveling now is not a path we should move forward on. We need to change direction.
So it sounds like the sort of general political moment was one of the things that inspired you to jump into this race for Congress. Were there any specific issues that led you to run for Congress? And why do you think you would be a better representative for the 3rd District than the other Democrats running in the primary against you?
Yeah, so I wasn't planning on running. I'd run 6 years ago. I had my shot. I was comfortable doing what I'm doing. I'm helping run a $4 billion government. The county executive, Steve Alone, in Suffolk County, his term is coming to an end in a year or so, and I was going to find my next place, and I was hoping to make a good living and grow out my days in Great Neck on the North Shore of Long Island, and use my voice in ways that might be interesting and possibly just different than what I've been doing now. And this seat opens up. I spoke to Tom Suozzi directly, and he told me he's running for governor. And I spoke to the county executive, Steve Alone, who I've been working with for years. And I spoke to others who I worked with when I was the town supervisor, when I was the elected executive. And there was a sense that this is something that calls for somebody to step forward. And it's not about giving back. That's not what I'm doing. It's about stepping forward. And I really believe that I've got an opinion, I've got experience, I've got perspective. I've taken the hits. I've learned to go up, over, around, or under, whatever it takes. I've watched what's going on in this country, and I've done it in a place of authority. I've grown my skills. I've learned my craft. I've grown in wisdom, hopefully, based on the failings that I have and the achievements that I've made. And it seems to me that this is a door that's open that I needed to step through, and so I am, and here I am.
Final preliminary question before we get into the specific issues that we're going to focus in on. You said you live in Great Neck, which is on the far eastern edge of the Nassau County portion of the New York 3rd District. It's also in the current 3rd District, Tom Suozzi's 3rd District. There's a chance that it could be carved into a different district when the maps are redrawn in a couple of weeks from this conversation. Any concerns about that possibility? Is there anything you can possibly do to prepare or prevent that from happening, or are you just sort of riding the roller coaster with everybody else?
Yeah, so I'm on the western side of Nassau County, so I'm right on the Queens border.
You are. I forgot. My compass got screwed up, and I apologize. You're on the western edge of Nassau. My apologies.
Oh, no problem at all. And so it's one of those things where we are facing the unknown, which is kind of a metaphor for where we are as a country, as a party, and for me personally. And so there's no concern other than that. You know, I'm engaged in this effort, and so I'm curious, as we all are. But I know that the town of North Hempstead, which is the town that I've been the town supervisor of, and I've been elected 5 times, and it's a town of almost 250,000 people, is a solid base. And so whatever happens, it's an open seat. And is it possible that somehow it gets connected to other candidates? It's highly unlikely it'll be connected to any other incumbent. And so me and my team, we're in. We're ready to go. We've laid that foundation, and so whatever comes. Let it happen.
Fair enough. I don't think anybody's casting a primary vote based on your ability to predict the future, especially when it comes to redistricting in New York State. So since nobody can see that future. All right, so let's move on to the first topic that your campaign has identified that you want to discuss, and we'll set the timer to 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, we'll find out what presto sounds like on my alarm. The issue is public safety. Normally, I would ask the candidate to define the issue and why it's a top issue for you personally. I will still do that. Your website under public safety lists bail reform as really the only topic listed there. Is that what you mean by public safety? Is this about bail reform or public safety in general?
It's about bail reform. It's about bail reform as a signature issue that we're dealing with because it represents something beyond bail reform. People in New York State, people in our communities are unnerved. They're I don't know if they're scared, but they're certainly concerned about what the party represents. And so this is about the Democratic Party. This is about a party that I've been involved with, that I've been fighting for and with for my whole adult life. You know, my philosophy is always that I've had one foot in the party and one foot out of the party. You know, it's a healthy way to approach the world. Because I don't always agree with my party, but I have been one of those people that helped shape the party. As we discussed very briefly, I've run campaigns, I've been elected, I've been the standard bearer. And right now there's people who have concerns as to whether or not this party is capable of governing. And if people do not feel like we can govern, then they will not give us the opportunity to fight for those larger issues, the issues of choice and climate change, and to protect us from rampant gun use, and to protect labor, and to fight for the issues that we've been fighting with on so many different levels, some of which we thought we achieved, others which are now at risk again. And so public safety becomes this idea that, as my experience watching the last election in Long Island suggests, and what people are feeling in New York City and the whole entire region, that Democrats are somehow out of touch. And the issue that they point to almost exclusively is public safety. They do not feel safe. And they do not feel safe because of something called bail reform. And most may not understand what bail reform is or was or should be, but they understand that something is wrong. And I believe that something is in fact wrong. It's not necessarily that the law as written is so misguided. We needed to reform the bail system of New York. It was and is broken. We need to make sure that we don't put poor people in jail because they are poor. You should not be in jail for stealing an apple, as somebody had once said, or $100 or whatever it might be, and have to stay in jail because you're poor. You need to be accountable, and the system is meant to hold you accountable. I'm a former judge. I set bail as a judge when I was a district court judge in Nassau County. I believe that there's a sense amongst the public that whatever law came down has lost touch with how crime works and the need that people have to feel safe. And it's not just about people's own personal security. It's about economic development. It's about New York City being able to come back from the pandemic. It's about people investing in buildings and communities. It's about people getting on subways again and buying that fare, which you don't have to buy, because under Manhattan's laws, you don't have to buy a fare, because the Manhattan prosecutor says he will under no circumstances prosecute you if you beat your fare. And so there's a question of, why should I pay and why should anyone pay? There are no rules. There's no structure anymore. The systems, the institutions are breaking. I've been watching the institutions being dismantled from the right. I've been critical of the past administration. And I see us doing that from the left, under the guidance or under the guise of what we are calling bail reform. And so to me, public safety is about bail reform. It's about how do we address this issue in a way that is rational, makes sense to the people we represent, instead of telling them what's best for them, instead of asserting our authenticity through our knowledge over them and what they feel. I believe we need to be more inclusive. I've governed. I understand that it's hard to have to bring voices that disagree with you. You might not get everything you want. We might not achieve every goal, but we will get the people behind what we're doing. And if we do that, bail reform will be much more effective in the future than it is today.
So how would you change the current state laws relating to bail and bail eligibility? And I know that the state government just made alterations to bail reform in the budget deal. Is that sufficient, or do you think the bail reform needs to be, I was going to say watered down, that's pejorative. Do you think it needs to be reformed further?
I think the first problem is the process. The process has been wrong every step of the way, including changing bail reform in the budget bill. The constituency that we all look to represent in this district, the people of New York City, the people on Long Island and Westchester, I think in many respects are frustrated about what we refer to bail reform, but it was done in back rooms. And I know that one of the candidates takes issue with me saying that she didn't include law enforcement and district attorneys and others because there was some committee chairman that was in the room at one moment or other. And that maybe none of us know how it really went down because only she was there. That's the problem. The problem is how it came about. The problem is that people who thought they knew better than anybody else created a law, imposed it on people because they were more just or authentic or whatever they claimed to be than the rest of us. And so they passed this law. And then it got amended because it wasn't working. And so there was nominal changes to it. And then again, it was still a political football. And so it was amended again in the budget bill, where there are no hearings, there's no public discussion, there's no input. It's private it's public people making decisions based on what they think they know about everyone else. I don't have all the answers. I know what my opinions may be regarding how bail should work, and I'm perfectly comfortable sharing that, and I will. But the fundamental problem with bail reform is the process that we've used and we continue to use. People of New York State need to be part of the decision-making process in setting bail reform, because one study shows 90% of New Yorkers do not feel safe. Well, if you're passing a law and 90% of your constituency feels unsafe because of the laws you passed, then maybe you did something wrong in the process of the law that you created. So the first step is changing the process.
Okay, so let's drill down on this a little bit. The Brennan Center for Justice at NYU put out a report in March that said bail reform has had no impact on crime rates in New York. There's no clear connection from A to B. Is that analysis incorrect? Is this based on how people are feeling as opposed to what the actual facts are? Help me explain that differential between your position and the position of 70% of New Yorkers in a recent poll, and I'll get to the details on that poll in a little bit, versus the Brennan Center, which has looked at it and said there doesn't seem to be any connection between bail reform and crime rates.
The Brennan Center is a great institution, and they are substantive, they are smart, they are really, I believe, a wonderful organization. And I place great value in their analysis. They also said in that report that it's only been 2 years and it's premature to really understand what's creating the spike in crime. And we do know that there is a spike in criminal conduct. It's less than it was 10 years ago. It's more than it was 2 years ago since bail reform passed. And so I do not discount that there's the statistical data is not necessarily connecting A to B to C in regard to why bail reform is or isn't working. We do know that crime is going up in many respects. It's incremental. There's a lot of reasons why that can be happening, and it has much to do, I believe, with the pandemic. I believe that there's a sense that the individual cases that we see exacerbate people's own sense of fear and concern. The numbers, though, that we understand is that if there's 100,000 criminal acts a year or arrests, the argument is that only 2% of people who are arrested are being rearrested for violent crimes. And so 2% is 2,000 people. 2,000 people, we understand that people who commit violent crimes are likely to commit most of the violent crimes. So it's not as if 2,000 people committing a violent crime are just committing one per person. A person who commits one violent crime is likely to commit multiple violent crimes.
But if I could, sir, just to inject a question, that means that 98,000 people in that example have been served well by bail reform. Now, I realize those 2,000 people in your example can do a lot of damage, but why shouldn't we be pushing the needle more towards the 98,000 than the 2,000?
So it's not 98,000. So it's 2,000 are committing violent crimes. 20,000 are committing other crimes that are not necessarily designated as violent. So we're talking about 20% or 22%, I suppose. And if we're talking about the number of crimes that are committed, it's probably closer to 25, 30, maybe 40% of the crimes that are committed. We're talking about 20,000 individuals the individual who commits a crime is more likely to commit many crimes. It could be many crimes are going unreported because there's no sense that it's going to be followed up. There's no arrest in many respects. The DA in Manhattan has said he's not prosecuting crimes, including violent crimes. And a violent crime is defined in New York as permanent disfigurement in many respects. So if you throw someone through a plate glass window, that is not a violent crime in New York State. In fact, if you punch someone in the face and break their nose, that is generally not a violent crime. And so there's violent acts that do not fall under the violent crime. They might not be part of the 2,000, but they're part of the 20,000. And so we have 20,000 people who are being released, most of which, or many of whom, should be released under normal circumstances. The question is, does someone have some proclivity towards violence or a greater threat? Should the judges be given some discretion? And this then goes to the question that you asked, what should be done? And if I was in the room arguing what should be done, and it's not necessarily a federal issue, but I have a bully pulpit and I have a voice and I have some experience in this issue, I would say that the goal would be to have judges given discretion so that they can decide if somebody is violent or has a propensity for violence, that they can be held. That could be a basis for some level of bail. There should be a check and balance so that if a judge does set bail, that within 24 hours or 48 hours, there's a check. Most people who do get sentenced to, or who do get some kind of bail, do make that bail. And the ones that don't are usually the ones who are the most violent amongst us or have the worst criminal records or are not allowed any bail at all. And so there's the data, the statistics that are being used go both ways. People are using data to say that there's 98% of the people aren't, but that's not really what the number is. And it's not just 2,000 people, but we're using the data to argue a case. And so the data, and we do know that statistics can be used in just about any which way, right?
Sure.
So what we've learned in our business, if we're trying to make a case, find some numbers and throw them out there and see what sticks. The fundamental concern is that the process was not proper. People are concerned. There's a level of chaos in our community to the extent that if the population does not have confidence in those that are governing, that we will protect them. We have a DA in Manhattan who said he will not prosecute the 20% of the people that get rearrested.
Okay, that's prompting a follow. I'm sorry to, but
sure, no problem.
You've mentioned Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg now 3 different times.
Yes.
You've also mentioned that judges should have greater discretion in determining bail. Why is it okay for judges to have that discretion when you seem so opposed to individual prosecutors having similar discretion as to what they want to prosecute or not prosecute? I realize you don't think that DA Bragg is making the right decisions here, but shouldn't he be entitled to the same discretion that you want to give to judges when it comes to bail?
So even with judges, I would put parameters on their discretion. And so if a judge remands somebody, puts someone in custody or sets an extremely high bail, or if somebody's in jail for a week on a nonviolent crime and there's a sense that the only reason they can't be released is because they don't have money and that they've now served maybe equivalent of their entire sentence that they would ultimately have served, we need to have checks and balances so that that person can be released. What Alvin Bragg has done is take it upon himself to decide, he's taken on the role of God. Like, he will decide that no one will be prosecuted in the vast rubric of his authority, that these crimes are no longer valid. So if you walk into a store and steal $500 worth of something, if you throw someone through a plate glass window, if you jump a turnstile, if you take feces and wipe it on someone and jump into a subway train, he's decided that is, the victim is no longer his concern. That is something that people should have a right to do. And if you want to be a district attorney, then you at least have to meet the parameters of what a district attorney does. You can prosecute somebody and then decide that I'm not going to put them in jail, I'm not going to convict them, I'm going to get them treatment. I'm going to get them some mental health assistance. I'm going to give them some type of conditional discharge recommendation so that they have certain levels of accountability so that we can follow them for a period of time. But what he's doing is saying, I'm simply not going to prosecute. He's dismantling the institution of the legislature that passed laws that says these are crimes. And I don't believe that he does have the authority to single-handedly use a level of discretion that says that a sweeping perspective of law is that I am no longer going to prosecute 60, 70, 80% of the laws in the state because he's decided that only a serious violent crime is worth prosecuting.
So you've mentioned that it doesn't seem like the public is on board, or at least the public is to some extent blaming bail reform. I I'm curious what's going on in the background, but I don't have time to ask you.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
gonna club here.
I'll pay the fine if you wind up picking one up. So anyway, you mentioned the numbers and that people are not supportive of the bail reform law and they think it's making them unsafe. And you're right based on the latest numbers. A March Siena poll asked in the New York City suburbs, has bail reform resulted in an increase in crime? And 70% said yes. So you're absolutely right about that. There is a popular wave against bail reform, or that is uncertain of bail reform, but there is a danger in governing based on populist opinion. And I would point out that 40% of Americans don't think that Joe Biden won the 2020 election fairly. I can't imagine you would want to take action on that number. 55 to 60% of Americans support the death penalty, which has been found unconstitutional in New York since 2004. 80% of Americans think that abortion should be legal in most or all circumstances. And we're very close to the Supreme Court potentially overruling Roe versus Wade. Is the popular opinion what's driving your position on bail reform? And aren't there some fights where it's important, even if the public's not on board with what you're trying to sell? Isn't this more of a sales problem than necessarily a policy problem?
No, I do not believe that it's a good law. I do not believe that it was done properly. If we pass a law that is properly vetted and messaged and has sufficient substance to meet the philosophical underpinnings of why we passed that law, then yes, then there are consequences. But to simply say that we are going to ignore the people, we know better. There's the great pull and tug of being in office, of being responsible as an official, whether you're an elected official or just a government official, is how do we balance the idea of what we believe is right and what the people we serve want. And that's a balance that is constant. We have an obligation to try to bring people along. And so an effective legislator, an effective government official, an effective government executive will, one, include the public in the process of creating laws, especially ones that might be controversial. They bring the public along in terms of educating them. And you do that by including all the voices at the table. There are people with different opinions that need to be heard. And that opinion might be one of a union, a police union. It might be the District Attorneys Association. It might be advocates, social justice advocates. They all need to be at the table. And when we decide that what we know is better because somehow there's the righteousness of somebody, everyone could come up with an example of the person that was put in jail because they're poor. And that should never happen. And then I can come up with an example of a person that was released and committed some great harm because the judge didn't have discretion to hold him. And then that creates a whole nother level of disregard. And so what we have is these two fighting kind of use of emotion and use of statistics. And, well, I have more people. People know that I'm right and you're right. And so what we've not done is actually have a process where people can see us evolve into this decision-making process, into the law. Let's share what's wrong with the bail system as it exists. Why is it wrong? And why are we making these laws the way we are? And what can we do now to give people some confidence that people who are dangerous are being held? And there's nuances, and there's been changes that are effective and helpful, but we haven't brought the people with them. It's like every time, well, yeah, we made a mistake, we did it wrong, let's just throw this in and that'll satisfy people. And it's not satisfying because they're still not at the table.
Final question on this, because we're going to run out of time for this topic fairly soon, but you're seeking election to Congress to represent New York's 3rd District. While there are certainly congressional hearings about individual topics, you don't have all the shareholders coming to the table when making laws in Washington, D.C. Are you proposing that that's something that we begin to do in Congress? How do you handle that in a forum that doesn't seem to lend itself to the kind of bring everybody to the table consensus building that you're talking about in this example?
I think one of the responsibilities of a congressman or any elected official is to bring people at the local level. I might not be able to have a hearing where everyone gets a voice in in Washington, D.C., but I could do it locally. I could have town hall meetings. And I was a town supervisor, so I'm very comfortable with town hall meetings and the idea of this local level. The town is the basic institution of government in New York State.
So you're the one elected official who likes town hall meetings.
Yes, that's true. I used to. I was one of those people that would never put a 2-minute, 3-minute limit on how long people could talk. We would just let people go on until whenever, and make sure that everybody had that voice. And I was combative at times. I was engaged. I had my differences of opinion with the people who came and presented to me in my town halls. But I heard them, and I shifted in my opinion based on things that I learned, or I tried to educate people and bring them along with me. And sometimes you have to make a call, and sometimes you make a decision or pass a law that is going to result in people being unhappy, and that might be the majority. That might be a percentage greater than whatever. But it's at least the process worked, and at least we've included people to the point where we can know that we've done everything we can, and then say to people that this is what we've decided as a community to do. We are going to implement this law, and we're going to see where it takes us.
Speaking of limits on speakers' time, we've hit the first timer for this first topic. Good conversation. Thank you very much. I'm going to set the alarm now to something called opening, which we'll find out what that sounds like in 20 minutes. As we shift on to topic number 2, which is government reform, which feels like a pretty wide and all-encompassing topic. What specifically are you talking about when it comes to government reform?
So throughout my career, I played a lot of different roles in government. I was a judge in the District Court of Nassau County. I was a public safety commissioner in North Hempstead. I eventually became the town supervisor. I've been in, I worked for the governor in Sandy relief, and now I'm deputy county executive. I oversaw NIFA, a financial control board. And so everywhere I go, every stop along the way, I look at the government that I am responsible for, and I say to myself, what should it look like if we created it today? What's wrong with what we're doing? Where are the barriers, the walls? Why are we limiting our ability to fulfill our larger mission? And so reform comes in a lot of different ways. When I was a judge, one of the first things I did is I sued the rest of the judges. There's 26 Nassau County District Court judges. Most of them were Republicans. I was one of the few Democrats, and I was appointed by somebody named Tom DiNapoli, who was a Democratic political leader at the time, but he would eventually move on. He was an assemblyman also at the time in Great Neck. But he had appointed me as a district court judge, and the judges were in charge of the Parking Violations Bureau. The Parking Violations Bureau in Nassau County was losing millions of dollars, and I said that we need to change the system because the board of judges, the 26 judges, were overseeing the administration of this Parking Violations Bureau, including issuing the tickets and then setting the fines and holding people accountable. So I sued, saying that it was an unconstitutional delegation of executive authority to the judiciary. Judiciary had no right to be both setting the law, administering the law, and then imposing the fines. They were both legislative, executive, and judge. And that was me as a student of politics and government. I looked at this and I said, this is not working. And they said I had no voice because I was only two Democrats amongst 24 Republican judges. And so I took it to the courts, and we won. And what happened was Tom DiNapoli, as a Democratic assemblyman, and a gentleman named Mike Balboni, as a Republican state senator, came together, created a new law, and put the Parking Violations Bureau into the executive's office in Nassau County, which is where it is today. And so that to me is reform. I looked at what was wrong, and I came and I fixed it. Not a lot of people thought it was the most important thing in the world, but government was not working. And the millions of dollars we were losing was not something that people were concerned about. They didn't even know about it, but I knew about it. And I was in a position to do something about it, and I did. And it became a story locally and all that, but it's the kind of thing that I've done everywhere I went. And so my next chapter is I go to town of North Hempstead. I become a public safety commissioner, and the town supervisor, May Newberger, brought me in. I was a private lawyer. I've tried major cases. She said, you've tried these big cases. The building department in our town is broken, and we can't get them to do anything, and you're a big you come in and fix it. And so as a public safety commissioner overseeing code enforcement, I tried to get them I asked them, how many code tickets did you write today? How many inspections did you do? And they said, no, they were not going to answer me. They wouldn't tell me. They didn't have to report to me. And so after 2 years, the thinking was I would fix it, but I didn't. in a sense, I failed. I could not get control of this rogue department. They were from a different party. They were in civil service. They had their own power. They had their own building. And so I couldn't get it done. But I left to become a judge for 2 years. And then when May Newberger retired, I quit the bench to run for town supervisor. And when I came back as town supervisor, the first thing as I did is walk into the building department and said, now I figured it out. I'd met a guy named Marty O'Malley, who was the mayor of Baltimore at the time, and I worked on Gary Hart's campaign with him. He was the national field director, I was the New York state director. And he created 311, Municipal 311 in Baltimore. And he told me all about it, and I said, this is what we're gonna do. And so and 311 is not just a hotline, it's a performance measurement tool, it's performance management. We collect data and we figure out how many people are calling and how long does it take us to respond and who's more efficient or productive, this quadrant or that quadrant. And so I created this entire system, the first suburban community in the country to do so. 311 at that time was just in cities. And we got it done, and we actually found bad things. We found people doing really bad things in the building department. We ended up cleaning the whole department up. People had to go, and a lot of changes were made. And so we reformed the entire system. And now today, 10, 15 years later, 311 still exists, 200,000 calls a year. And every single thing in North Hempstead, if you call for how long does it take to get a pothole fixed? 2 business days. How long does it take to get a branch removed from an overhanging branch? 3 days. How long does it take to get a light fix, a street light fix? 4 days. And so how long does it get to get a new tree planted on your front and your right of way? 6 months. So we've created a system where everyone's expectations are managed. It's all documented. It's all based on data. We can shift resources so that we can govern more efficiently and effectively. I've won all sorts of national awards for my the measurement and the data measurement and management that I've done as a town supervisor. And so this to me is about reforming government so that it works. And by the way, when I came to Suffolk County, one of the first things I did is create 311 for Suffolk County, the first county in New York State to do 311.
So that's some of your experiences with government reform on the local and county level. How does that apply federally? How do you apply those same principles? Have you identified areas of federal governmental operation that you think need to be reformed? And if you have, what kinds of reforms would you like to see implemented?
So what I've learned is this. When I first came to Suffolk County, the county executive in his State of the County speech said Jon Kaiman is going to lead charter reform for Suffolk County. And I had no plan. I didn't have a list of things that were broken. And someone gave me the charter and said, okay, why don't you read it? Let's figure out what's broken. I said, well, that's not how reform works either, by the way. You don't just make a list of what's wrong in the world. What we do is we need to see how government is operating. And so we looked at the structure of government and the inefficiencies. We know that at the same time the governor was creating something called shared services, and so I led this whole effort to create what we call Suffolk Share in Suffolk County, so that villages in town, we have 30 villages and we have 10 towns and 70 districts, 70 school districts. How can we all work together? And we found a way to create reforms based on the inefficiencies of how government was operating and the rules that exist. Where do we need to change the local law? Where do we need to change the state law? Where do we need to change our operation? Where do we need to educate people? So I'm not looking at the federal government and saying Jon Kaiman somehow is going to have a list of everything that's wrong with the Congress and the country, as if somehow I know. What I'm coming to this race with is an experience in understanding how people operate within the parameters of government. Where we go wrong, we do things because that's the way we've done them. And we do things because some powerful force has taken control of this area or that area. And then that powerful force leaves, and you have people with less skills or less intentions or whatever it is to come in and try to mirror or follow suit, and they can't. And so what I would say is, first of all, reform really is about local government. How do we use federal resources to give local government the tools to better manage itself? And so that's where, when people look at government, there's polarization in Washington and there's all sorts of problems. I believe I'd be an effective person at navigating that polarization. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about going to Washington, understanding how local districts work, how local towns and villages work, how counties work, how the state works, understanding how people operate within the confines and parameters of government, looking for what's broken. In my town in North Hempstead, people would call their town and they would get transferred 8 to 10 times before they found the right person, or they just gave up. That's why I brought 311 in. People have given up on government. It was a lack of confidence. That's what we have in Washington. But the goal of Washington, the purpose of a congressman, is to help local government work, is to give us the tools, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about managing the money, whether it's about public safety, whether it's about building roads, picking up waste. All these things that we do locally have an impact on the community, and the federal government is meant to provide laws and rules and resources to give us the ability to do it properly.
Isn't that the same rationale, though, that allows one state, let's say, to have different abortion laws than another state, or allows one state to have different laws when it comes to homosexuality and what's taught in schools than another? I mean, that I understand the local angle of what you're saying, but to say that states and municipalities should really be able to fix, the role of the federal government is to help them do that themselves, that feels like it's pretty close to the can of worms that we're seeing play out on a lot of key issues right now. How am I misreading what you're saying?
So I'm talking about the operations of government. When we're talking about constitutional protections, when we're talking about the underpinnings of democracy, the right to vote, the right to have choice, the very fabric of our Constitution and a nation of laws, those need to be codified or fought for and protected at the national level. If the Supreme Court fails, which it's likely to do, protecting choice, we need to have national protections for these rights. Whether or not it's interpreted as a constitutional protection or not, the one way to handle that is to codify those, and I would certainly support doing that. So I believe in the Women's Health Protection Act, where we would codify Roe v. Wade. I believe that we need a host of different laws to protect us, because nationally we are losing the ability to go locally and know that these fundamental rights are being preserved. And so there are two pieces of it. There is a responsibility to, one, understand what our rights as human beings are, or as citizens, or as residents, however we want to define a particular right, however we can define it. Congress has an obligation to be able to go to Congress, bring those laws home, and understand if we fail there, at the very least, we have the tools to protect our residents at home as well.
I'm glad you clarified that. I wanted to give you that chance just to better flesh out what it is you're saying. And I'm still not sure that I'm 100% certain of what it is you're saying. One of the gists that I'm getting is that you almost want to make the federal government more customer service friendly, in the same way, the equivalent of being able to call a 311. And I think back to, it's about 3 weeks ago, we all had the deadline for paying our federal taxes. And I've read a lot where the IRS could send you a bill, basically. It already knows what you're going to wind up paying or owing in federal taxes, and it still makes citizens go through the rigmarole of filing a complete return and potentially getting tripped up. Is that the kind of customer-friendly customer service change that you're looking to make, or am I still off the mark a little bit?
I want government to work. And I want people to believe in their government. I want people to believe in their system. If the system breaks down, if people lose faith and confidence in our government, then our government will cease to be able to be the government that it is today. And we see that on a national level. If people no longer have confidence in democracy, then the democracy ends. We are on the verge of this polarized place in our history, where a significant portion of our country is not sure that we will exist as a democracy in years ahead. And so, if people lose confidence, and I get the how it's more fun and interesting, and sometimes there's just more interest in talking about the larger than life issues. I'm going to fix the world. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to do these wonderful things that this group believes in, even though this group is diametrically opposed, but at least they'll be my people and I will be their leader and their hero. That's not what I think we need. I believe what we need is people to feel. You talked about it earlier. Do people just feel that it's unsafe? And we're talking about poll numbers. Yes, people do need to feel that their democracy is working. Even if we take a poll and suggest that it's not, we still need to fight to make it work. And so people's emotions are part of the reality of our success and survival. And so I believe that we need to do things at the local level that give people confidence that we know how to protect their property, that we know how to keep them safe, that we know how to manage their money, that we know how to deal with the crises that are coming, climate change for one. So we know how to respond to the challenges and crises that are coming down the pike in ways that make sense to people. And so when we go too far ahead, we might call ourselves a leader, but leading isn't something that you are, it's something that you do. And so if a true leader isn't simply out in front with more wisdom than anybody else for the few moments that they happen to be there, a true leader is somebody that can be that teacher that brings people along with them, so that left, right, and center, people are, even with their differences, are walking that walk towards a better place. And that means that we need to do things in Washington so that people locally have confidence that we are all part of the same country, same democracy, same world, even if we have fundamental differences from Democrats to Republicans.
So with the remaining time, I want to ask you some questions on a few government reform related questions. May not be in your vision of government reform, but they were when I prepped for this interview, so I'm going to ask them anyway. Sure. One of my biggest frustrations as a reporter and as a citizen during the Trump administration was the ongoing feud between Congress and the White House, where Congress would make a demand or issue a subpoena and the White House would not respond or would sue or file, make a case in court and delay the process again and again and again. And there were a couple of issues where he was able to run out the clock while he was in office. One aspect of government reform might be creating a branch of the judiciary that just deals with intergovernmental disputes or disputes between the executive and Congress, so that we're not waiting months on a decision that the whole country is waiting on. You could make the argument that there just aren't enough federal judges, period. And that needs to be, the federal judgeship needs to be expanded so that you can get speedier justice done. What would your take be on either one of those proposals?
So first of all, I love that. I absolutely agree. I think two things. First, the way to deal with the adversity and the challenges of dysfunctionality of government is to set parameters and guidelines. I see it at the local level when you see people doing bad things. It's generally that there's not proper oversight, guidance, accountability. And so I hope people, I think accountability is a key criteria at every level, whether it's somebody doing something wrong at the local level, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a person who throws someone through that plate glass window. There has to be a level of accountability and an expectation that we're going to hold people accountable. That goes the same for Washington and for any workplace environment. What are the rules? Let's clearly delineate them. If they don't work or they're obsolete or they're vague or they're misunderstood, let's clarify them. And with, by the way, all the voices at the table to understand what we're doing, because ultimately both sides benefit, unless you're literally trying to break the country. Both sides benefit when we have some level of confidence in the rules that we're creating. And so when it comes to subpoenas and White House versus Congress, we should have a series of rules that we put in place that give people some institutional structure for how they work. That's reform, and that's the kind of thing that I do locally. That's what I would do in Congress. The idea of creating, that there are definitely not enough federal judges, and we do need to reform the judiciary, and that's a whole other discussion, but I certainly think that there's a need to bring more voices. And we have magistrates, right? So that we created this whole other level of judge. And so maybe there's administrative judges, but we can continue to do that. As long as there's, goals, a strategic plan, that we have goals, rules, responsibilities, accountability, limits on power, and transparency, so that everybody knows what they are allowed to do and not allowed to do, so it doesn't get out of control. So that's how, that's what I would want to do at the federal level as well.
I want to explore when you said so that individuals don't have too much power, and this will probably be the last question we get in this segment. Does the president of the United States have too much power when it comes to the balance of power, which has been shifting from Congress to the White House for the last 40 years, if not longer? And if so, how do you rein in that power, particularly in a partisan era when each party is looking out for what they think is going to be the best interest of their next elected president from their own party?
So I agree on the one hand that there's been a shift in presidential authority. We know that through the executive orders and through the right to not declare war but engage in war, presidents have increasingly grown in power. I see it though a little bit differently, and I have studied this. I am a student of government, and still, I think the judiciary is also, one could argue, has too much power. Look what the Supreme Court is in the process of doing, undermining all sorts of bedrock institutional and fundamental laws that we thought were established, and yet one or two people, and then the whole country is now, all these laws and what was a woman's right is now some kind of horrific criminal act. So the judiciary has its own issues with power. The legislature also has potentially too much power. We're on the verge of having our federal or national legislature be in a position to overthrow the government if they don't like the results of a national election. Do we want to elevate the legislature to be able to do that?
Well, now you're suggesting, as my friend Bill from Schoolhouse Rock behind me would point out, that's all three branches of government that you say have too much power.
Right. It is. Yes. And so the I think part of the answer is to say that not that we don't necessarily want to take power away from the executive to give it to the legislature, because we're seeing a polarized legislature that can be very dangerous. And there's people in our national legislature today that I believe are extremely dangerous, and we've seen that on January 6th. And so I believe that what we really need to do is evaluate how power is used and reassess the checks and balances that we've been using to keep us within the boundaries. And we want to be able to be creative, and we want to be able to respond to crises, and we want to be able to be a voice of the people and let people's, even if we disagree with how those voices manifest themselves. But we still need to reform our government in a way that gives us the ability to keep us from lurching so far to the left, or lurching so far to the right, or lurching to, in God knows where we might find ourselves, in a way that everybody, the population, gives up. And they give up for different reasons, right? The people on the right are giving up for one reason, people on the left are giving up for a different reason. But the result is that if people are washing their hands of the institution of American democracy, then we've got bigger problems ahead. And we resolve that by explaining and educating and really digging down into what's working, what's not, and what within the confines of our Constitution and our federalist system can we put into place so that we have parameters, guidelines, accountability, and transparency. And that's kind of the theme of reform, from the local school district and water district all the way up to the presidency of the United States.
That concludes the second segment of this podcast. We now move on to the third 20-minute segment, where I get to pick the topic or topics. Okay. And because you can take the TV anchor out of the studio, but you can't take whatever the finish of that expression would be, I can't just do one topic in my 20 minutes. I have to ask a lot of them. So we'll set the clock for 20 minutes. And I want to start with inflation, which I think is going to be the biggest single issue for voters this fall. We know what the impact of inflation is. What's causing it, and how do we fix it?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I speak as one every time someone asks me questions like this. So, I was actually recently in an economics course where the economics professor said, when you put too much money, cash, into a system, you will create, it will overheat, the economy will overheat, you will create inflation. And of course, that was never going to happen again, so it was not something we really worried about. It was academic. But then again, we see what happens after the pandemic, and we put an incredible amount of money into the system, through the trillions of dollars that needed to be put in. And so there's a piece of this equation that economists say, when you put trillions of dollars or billions, but trillions of dollars of cash into the economy, you're going to overheat the economy. Now, I believe that probably created a minimal part of it. Then we add that there's supply chain issues. We add that and so that's a concern because there's increased demand and limited product, and so the value of when you have more demand than you have supply, then you increase the cost of things because people are willing to pay more, and then you have what's going on in the Ukraine with oil, and so that creates a whole nother area of it. And I think all this combination of things led to this inflationary period that was manageable if it was any individual item, but the collection of them has created something beyond our capacity to handle so far, and we're struggling to deal with it.
How would you respond to somebody who takes note of that, but then also looks at the bottom lines of some of the biggest corporations in the country and notes that, yeah, even though the price of gas is over $4.50 a gallon, gas companies are still making record or close to record profits, and a number of other companies in this economy with this inflation are making record or near record profits, and that makes it feel like some of the inflationary pressure is artificial.
So some of it is, and so as a traditional Democrat, I believe that we need levels of regulation to hold others in power accountable, and to put restrictions and parameters on them as well. And so this is where we have an obligation to look at when people price gouge. We need the tools in place, and of course, the last administration spent its 4 years dismantling our ability to regulate and govern. We are now seeing the manifestation of that when those in power with especially the corporate world, our ability to regulate and control them is reduced. And so, as a traditional Democrat, the answer to that is to create additional regulation, but to make sure those that exist are being enforced, and to invest in the enforcement of it, not to disinvest in it, and that's what happened again in the last 4 years. Our entire national government was just denuded of those people that would be able to hold people in check, and so we need to reestablish that, and I believe the country should invest in that significantly.
Maybe no group is feeling the brunt of inflation and the current economy as much as the middle class is right now. And of course, everybody thinks that they're part of the middle class, whether they are or they aren't, depending, the median income in this country is, I think, $56,000, which might not get you a studio apartment in the 3rd district. In all places. How do we protect the middle class? For 40 plus years, it's been shrinking in size. It's been shrinking in dollar value. It's been shrinking in income level. And I saw another stat recently that 64% of Americans, it's almost 2/3 of all Americans, now say they're living paycheck to paycheck right now. That's as far from the middle class ideal as you can possibly get. How do you keep people in the middle class, which then enables them to remain in places like New York's 3rd district?
So I think the middle class is the economic engine of the country because they pay most of the taxes. Right? We know that if you don't make a certain amount of money, then you're paying less, or you're not paying the taxes that the middle class are paying. And if you make an extreme amount of money, we know that you don't have to pay taxes either. So at the end of the day, it's the middle class that's kind of footing the bill. Although those with great wealth will argue that they pay a lot of taxes in various forms, and to some extent they do. And so I think that we need to make sure that our tax system doesn't continuously look for ways to help everybody at the expense of the middle class. And that's one of the problems I have with the extreme left of my party, where let's just keep on coming up with ways to give things to people that we think is a need, and it is, but now we redefine it as a right, and so now we have to do it, and now that we're going to do it, we need to pay for it. Who's going to pay for it? Well, I run a county government. I know when I see the New York State government say we're going to give this new service, we're going to provide this new benefit to people, I know exactly who's going to pay for that. I know that we're going to get a bill, either the government itself directly or the people who I represent or we represent are going to have to pay that bill, and that's the middle class. And so one of the problems with legislative ideals that have no executive responsibility is they don't have to do the math. it's all academic. It's ideological. It's feeling. Talk about feelings. It's just about I want to help, and if I give everybody this, then yes, that they'll be better off. So, and we could talk about healthcare, and we could talk about education, we could talk about all sorts of other things that we do this. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing. We should. We can't bankrupt the middle class because they're sending their children to college, and the cost of college is too high, and so there needs to be a way to reduce those costs. We need to make sure that energy costs aren't extraordinary. We need to reduce the cost of oil, and we need to do that by creating alternative fuels so that we can have electric vehicles and the charging stations and the infrastructure so that there are different options down the road. And so to me, it's about how do we make the system work today. And so if the question is the middle class is getting beaten up right now, you could have a tax cut, you could provide additional star exemptions, and we figure out a million different ways to give money to people. But I think in the longer run, we need to figure out how to make community work for those that have achieved a level of community, because they're either renting or buying in a community, they're driving on the roads, they're using mass transportation, they're using the buses. We need to provide those resources so that if you don't own a car, you could use a bus. If you don't have a bus, if you don't have access to a subway, you can use a bus. We need to make sure that there's the institutional infrastructure for people to be able to navigate the challenges of the world, so that if their car breaks down, they don't lose their job and then lose their ability to meet that next paycheck and pay their rent. So that's an overview, I suppose.
One of the lessons from my years of civics education, again, I reference Bill behind me, is that compromise has been an underlying feature of this nation. It was in the formation of the Constitution. It has been in the years since. The country may never have been formed without compromise. It certainly wouldn't have held together as long as it did without compromise. But it doesn't seem like compromise is really viable right now on the national level. Each side is sort of sticking to its own, and there are penalties in a lot of cases for lawmakers who cross the aisle and are seen as being too cozy with the other side. How do we break that? This is my government reform question. How do we break that cycle and make it so that Washington actually works again?
So folks at the local level have figured this out. And the way we do it is that we work on issues relevant to mutual constituencies. And we use language that allows us to incrementally get to a place that creates the change that we need. And so the word compromise is considered a pejorative term. I hear that we need we need bold policymakers and decision makers, which is bold means what? Does bold mean extreme? Is it bold to say that I believe bail reform should be just made public and let's talk about it publicly? Is that not bold, considering what we think who the voters are in a primary election? I think that if the focus is about the goals that we have and not the framework that we're presenting it in, we categorize things in terms of the identifications that we have, the identities that we use. So if it's identified as a Democratic thing, or if it's identified as a Republican thing, or if it's identified as a woke thing, or it's identified as a jingoistic thing, we're putting these labels on this, and we're playing the game to an extent because our constituencies are so frustrated with the other that we feel that we need to push back in equal terms and equal extremes. And I believe that we learn from local government and local leaders and folks who have the experience like mine can speak to people on both sides of the aisle and say, okay, you know what, I don't need to achieve this high level thing that I'm trying to achieve, but why don't we start here? Why don't we do this? Why don't we figure it out? And obviously there's a million different variations of it. So I think that the framework of compromise is almost a misstatement of how you want to do this, I want to do that, let's compromise. It's more, let's not even use that language. Let's just figure out how do we fix this problem? What's the solution? We have flooding coming into our neighborhood because storms are now, we have too much water coming in too quick a period of time. And so it's not about how I'm going to label it. I need bigger pipes under the water, and I need the sewers storm drains to be able to get more water quicker. And so if it's about storm drains being able to capture water instead of defining it as climate change and we're going to save the planet, then maybe we'll get to a different result, a more realistic result, much quicker.
But I'm sure you know as well as anybody that after Hurricane Sandy hit and New York went to the federal government looking for some assistance, Republicans wouldn't vote for it. I mean, Ted Cruz, who campaigned in New York and raised money in New York, wouldn't vote for disaster relief for New York. And so that was really, it took almost 20 years to get the Zadroga Act passed so that the people who worked at Ground Zero could actually get medical care. I'm just, if it's not about, okay, let's move a little from the left and a little to the right and find that common ground in the middle, but how do you break the cycle that we seem to be in, especially when the parties are dealing with a different set of facts now? You can't even say that the problem is X. It's X plus spin on one side and X plus spin on the other side. I'm just wondering how we break that logjam.
Right, people create their own truths now, and somehow that seems to be fashionable and somehow allowable, and everyone's trying to navigate that. That'll be the when the history books write about our era, how we resolve that issue is going to be the final chapter of that history book until you get to your next the next book.
If we resolve that,
if we resolve it, and if there is another, if there's a next era, right, and so that's the big question. There's issues worth fighting for, and I know that my friends on the left might look at what I'm saying and say that, I'm just kind of in this kind of administrative world. I'm passionate about the larger issues that we fight for as Democrats, and I've been on those front lines. I've been on the picket lines, and I've been, when I deal with climate change, I've converted fleets to alternative vehicles. I've built the wetlands that create the natural barriers. I've merged sewer plants so we go from secondary treatment to tertiary treatment to reduce the nitrogen in the water. I'm actually doing these things not from some 10,000 feet in the air saying how I'm going to do this great, wonderful thing. It's just I go in and I govern. And I think, by the way, bringing that executive experience to Congress is as a legislator is going to allow me to have that conversation that we're talking about with others and pass those bills. And when we're talking about infrastructure, talk about infrastructure so that the other side agrees how we define infrastructure, by the way, and so that at least we can come to terms with that. And the Democratic Party goes, we're going to change the definition of infrastructure, and then criticize you for pointing out that we changed the rules of the game because you changed the rules of the game. Therefore, we both change the rules of the game, and therefore no one trusts anybody, and therefore we get nothing. And so, to me, I'm on my side, so I support my side. I support the Democrats, but I would do it differently. And it doesn't mean that there's not times when I'm going to give a speech from the pulpit and try to create that passion and energy to bring people along, because that is important also. And I too can articulate these larger than life issues and why it's important that we look beyond ourselves so that we can do something larger than ourselves. And there are times when we do have those majorities that can create new pathways. And I too will be there and will be one of those voices. But I will only be that voice if I can be credible during those interim periods, those boring interim periods that actually where we actually have to govern. Because if every day we're shouting from the mountaintop, then it's a very lonely place to be, and we don't actually have a lot of people to the left or right of us at that when we're shouting from this lonely pinnacle of authority and power.
I don't know how many people would agree with me, but I actually look forward to an era of boring government in Washington. It would be a nice change of pace from where we've been. But I want to ask, because you've mentioned your executive experience multiple times throughout this interview, and executives have vastly greater ability to get stuff done than a legislative body does. You can issue a report or issue a study. There are some unilateral actions that you take. You don't need 218 votes in agreement to get most of the stuff done as an executive, but you do as a member of Congress. Won't that be somewhat stifling for you to come from an environment where you have been able to roll up your sleeves and get stuff done, and instead be part of a legislature where you need a majority of 218 votes to get anything done?
I see the trajectory or the course of my career as an executive. When I was town supervisor, I was also a legislator. I had a vote on the town board. As deputy county executive, there's 18 legislators in Suffolk County that we need to bring along. It's again the power of the executive. It feels like we could just tell people what to do, and oftentimes legislators feel like that's what we're doing. But the truth is, we are only successful when we bring them along with us. When I was the chairman of NYFA, I had exclusive authority. I could reject every contract in Nassau County. The police contract, they wanted to create a police contract. I had to rewrite the police contract in order to get it through, so we could lift a wage freeze so that public employees can get 10,000 public employees can get paid. But the way to do it is to bring the legislative players to the table. And so I've learned, even when I was negotiating police contracts in Nassau County, or negotiating in Suffolk County, I did that there as well, that I would set up an appointment and bring the Republican caucus. I would have a meeting with them. Then I would have a meeting with the Democratic caucus and say, this is what we're doing, and these are the issues, this is what we're facing. I believe if decision makers have the same information that I have, we generally would get to the same decision most of the time. I believe if the public knows what the public official knows, they too will generally find their way to a similar conclusion. And so much of this is just being able to communicate and understand the rules of how government works, understand the players and their individual roles and responsibilities. We talked about the power of the executive, but the legislative and judiciary can be dangerous too. But they could also be incredibly productive and do wonderful, important things. And if we respect their roles and work with them so that together we can all play the role we play. If I'm a legislator in Congress, I'm also going to be on a committee. There's the committees and the subcommittees, there's executive kind of roles that we have in those committees. But as legislators, we have the ability to come together and partner with these other roles at the local level, in the judiciary, in the executive branch, and make that change. And that's where I think all the pieces of my career will come together and allow me to do so. And I chaired the Police Reform Task Force, co-chaired with my wonderful co-chair, and together we brought the unions together. We brought the legislators together. We brought them to the table and said, this is what we want to do. We brought the advocates together. We brought the people who were impacted by negative experiences. It's all about that level and ability to communicate and understand everybody's roles and responsibilities.
And I'm sure that was effective when dealing with members of the Nassau County Legislature or members of the Suffolk County Legislature. But those groups don't include Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and I think Matt Gaetz and Madison Cawthorn and Kevin McCarthy. And what's more, based on all polling and based on, experience during midterm elections, it very much looks like they're going to be in the majority in the next Congress if the trends continue. So in addition to Washington not quite being the same dynamic, you're setting yourself up to be in the minority and having to oppose this Republican agenda. I assume that would be what you would spend most of your time doing. And does that make the possibility of being in Congress less attractive, especially if you have to spend the first 2 years in office as a party player most of the time, voting as a bloc against a Republican agenda that I'm sure you oppose most of?
Yes, I certainly oppose most of it. So every local legislature has its Boebert and Greenes. They look a little different. Their power might be a little different, but they sound a lot.
Oh, I know.
And your local school boards are starting to have these people enter, and so it really is. There's every local government, every state government, and the federal government has these players that we used to refer to them as the fringe or the extremes, and so the difference today is that they seem to have the voice of a large part of their party, and so that makes it a little bit more challenging. But the truth is, what we learn at the local level is that I know Congress people, I know U.S. senators, we're all people who work in government. And the ability to understand how to engage doesn't really change when we're dealing with these people. The problem that the Republican Party is going to have if they take over after this next election is that they have to deal with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they want to be responsible. And there comes a point when their own party divides into their own factions, and they have to make that choice. And we've seen that last time they were in charge. They couldn't get anything done because they were going to get rid of the ACA. They were going to get rid of Affordable Care Act. They couldn't do any of it because they turn on each other. And so then the question becomes, what do we do then? And is there some other new evolution of power and influence that emerges? And who amongst us will be able to help direct that based on our own skills, experience, and sense of how this country should move forward? I certainly think I'm one of those people, and I'm not exclusive to that, but I'm putting myself forward because I think the skills I have, the experience I have, gives me that ability to navigate this new world, regardless of whether or not we're in the majority or the minority.
And with that, we come to the end of the third 20-minute segment, and we move on to the candidate questionnaire. Now, these are supposed to be shorter answer questions, although the first one, take your time because it's a little bit complicated. And it's also designed to go from more serious topic to less serious topic, some designed to get to know what your positions are, some designed to get to know you a little bit better. But I want to start with the winner of this race, if the trends continue and the courts don't redraw the districts again, would be in a position to theoretically hold this seat for the next decade, or at least have a leg up in doing so. So with that in mind, what steps will you take, perhaps above and beyond what the laws and ethics rules require, to ensure to voters that you will not be profiting from your position in Congress?
So, the key element to accountability for any elected official is disclosure. Making sure that, as I've said before, the common theme is parameters, transparency, accountability. And a lot of the times we have the rules in place. It's a question of enforcing them. It's a question of understanding them. I've seen people in government do horrible things or make mistakes and end up losing their way. Sometimes it's because I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do horrible, terrible things to people. I think it's this incremental thing where somehow I do something and no one seems to see or care, and it just becomes the culture, and it becomes like accepted behavior. And then all of a sudden someone shines a light on it and we're like, oh wow, this is really bad. And so the way to address that is to make sure that we have a constant understanding of what the rules are, what the parameters are, how should we be conducting ourselves? How do we make sure that we are transparent so that the light of day shines on our everyday activities, what we invest in, what kind of, how we treat each other, and the things that we do. And then to know how accountability works, what can happen. And so to me, that's how it works locally, and it works because we find people that do bad things and they're held accountable, and people then say, oh, well, government's not working. Well, maybe government is working when we find people doing that. But I think that would be the same at the national level.
On this line, should Congress people not be allowed to trade stocks while they're in office? Will you not trade stocks while in office?
I think I have 2 stocks. And I'm more than happy not to have those 2 stocks. I think that there's, I know there's also really extreme restrictions on a congressman's ability to make money. You can't make anything more than X dollars over your salary. And so I think those are good rules. I think that we need to hold people to them. If there's right now they're allowed to trade stocks. The problem is, are there insider information that they're getting, and is there any level of accountability? If there's a way to do that, that's fair, then we should do it. If there's ways that not, then we should end the practice. And I don't know the answer, but I know how it should end. It should end on what can work, and how can we make sure that everyone's being treated the same and being held accountable.
Question number 2, if given your choice, which congressional committees would you want to sit on and why?
So, certainly oversight and reform, because that's kind of the whole theme here. And that covers a lot of areas of governance. So that to me would be number 1. It's just a really interesting committee, and it's the kind of thing that I would really enjoy doing, and I think I would be good at it. I'd probably want to be on infrastructure and transportation. I think those also tie into making, if we want community to work, people need to know that their roads work, the buses are there on time, that we have, our bus drivers are being, kept safe, and our subways are clean, all these things that we have. So I would say and that we have, sufficient mass transit and new waves of mass transit that will work, and highways that are safe and sound, and that kind of thing. So infrastructure and transportation would be my other one.
Question number 3, assuming that the mainstream reporting, and by that I mean New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, excuse me, assuming that the mainstream reporting is accurate, Should Donald Trump be criminally prosecuted?
If they find probable cause that he committed a crime, then yes. If he reaches that threshold, then yes.
Should Clarence Thomas be impeached?
I think Clarence Thomas is probably one of the worst judges in American history, certainly from where I stand on decisions that are rendered. I do not think an impeachment proceeding today is appropriate, and I think it would cause more harm than good. I don't think we should start impeaching federal judges because of something their spouse did. And if there is some other level of evidence that suggests a level of criminality, then yes, but I don't. We're certainly not there. And just not liking him, and thinking and appreciating how bad a judge he actually is, doesn't rise to that level. So no, I would not do that.
But when it comes to Trump, if there is probable cause to think that he may have committed a crime, there's two thoughts that come to mind. One is the fact that we've never really done this before, with the exception of prosecuting Aaron Burr for treason in the Jefferson administration. We really don't do that when it comes to presidents or vice presidents. And you sort of open the door to a never-ending series of prosecutions of Joe Biden and future Democratic presidents. Are those repercussions, should they be considered when considering whether or not to prosecute?
They should be considered, but the challenge is, if someone commits horrific crimes or any types of crimes before they were president, while they were president, after they were president, do they have a free, blank slate to just there's no accountability? And the answer cannot be yes, right? So the answer has to be no. So the answer is there has to be some level of accountability. That said, I do not believe that if there's, I think it would have to be a pretty significant finding, and one that goes beyond simply a breaking of the letter of the law, because the institution of the presidency is also a factor here, and the institution of governance comes into play when we weaponize this process. Again, the problem is that there seems to be those of us who follow Donald Trump would look at him and say, my God, he seems to have been mischaracterizing the value of his properties, and then on the next page doing it another way, and benefiting and reaping these rewards, and he's the emoluments clause, and there's one thing after another. But it cannot be simply a level of punishment. He is not this, everyone's equal under the eyes of the law. The institution itself does factor in. I don't envy the person who would make that choice. And by the way, I'm afraid it's going to be my, we know who it's going to be. Is it Alvin Bragg again?
I think I have a call from Merrick Garland for you. I think he's got some issues with that part. I promise these will move faster as we keep going. Question number 4, is there ever a circumstance where it would be appropriate for a member of Congress to lie to his or her constituents?
No.
What about not tell the whole truth?
If you're not telling the whole truth to create a misimpression, in other words, a falsehood, then that's a lie. If you're not telling the whole truth because you're not sharing all the information then that's not lying by omission. That's simply, there's information that you're not allowed to share for some reason or another. And so I know we all want to just say that, yes, of course, everyone should say everything that they know, but it's, bottom line is we need and must be honest. And if we, by omission, we are creating a falsehood, then that is a lie. And the answer is no, we should never lie to create that falsehood. But by not sharing all information, it doesn't mean that we have to share every.
Nuance is an important part of the job. So that was one of the rationales behind that question. Number 5, state a public policy position or a decision that you've made in the past with which you now disagree or regret.
So almost everything that I do, and I've had all these roles, and I make 10, 15, 20 decisions a week, some very minor, some fairly major, in all these different capacities. And I've learned of those 20, every 20 decisions I make, 2 of them are probably wrong, and might be downright just bad decisions. It's if I was a baseball player, that would be a pretty good average. But when you're in government, bad things can happen to people based on these decisions. So I've learned that I make decisions all the time that are not perfect, but I also have an obligation to make decisions. And so not making a decision sometimes creates bad things too. And so that I learn every time I make a decision. You know, everything I do today is practice for tomorrow. Every decision I make is a learning experience for how to make the next one. And so just a constant flow of decision making in government is one where we make mistakes, we learn from them. The key is to learn. In terms of more specific, as I'm saying that, I'm trying to think of, buying myself a little time to think of something. So one of the things we did do in police reform is student resource officers. There was a big movement to not have student resource officers anymore. Student resource officers are police that work in the schools. And there's an argument that it's student resource officers, a cop who's got a gun, it's a school to prison pipeline kind of thing. And during our reform process, people were really, many people were upset about it. And so I took the position at I said, okay, well, let's bring it to the task force. Went to the county executive and said, you know what, let's get rid of it. We'll save millions of dollars. People don't want it. It's, I wouldn't want people with guns in my school. And then during when we had the advocates in and all the 30, 40 people in our task force, people who have those officers said, no, we want those things. We have a neighborhood where we need people to learn how to navigate with police. These people, the officers in the schools are extremely talented and empathetic and they give heartfelt advice and assistance. And the neighborhoods, these neighborhoods that might have economic distress for one reason or other, are really benefiting from them. And so maybe instead of getting rid of them, let's rewrite the contract. Let's put parameters on it. Let's put guidelines on it. And that's exactly what we did. We came back. We put limitations on that. You can't, the police officer can't arrest somebody in a classroom. You can't do this. You can't do that. And now, I agree. We should keep the student resource officers. And so I think it was a good experience to evolve. But I think that happens. I think it happens with all of us in government, and maybe all our professional lives as parents, whatever we are. It's kind of a way of learning and being better.
I think you've given multiple answers to this next question throughout the course of the interview, but I'm curious what comes to mind when I ask it. Name a position that you hold that you think might be out of step with the bulk of your party.
Well, I guess bail reform is probably a good place to start. I don't agree with Medicare for all. So, I believe in universal health care, and I don't think they're the same thing. I think in our country we have, I would not abolish the private healthcare system, and I think a lot of unions and organizations and people have, tens of millions of people have fought for private healthcare. I think the Affordable Care Act needs to be amended and repaired. It could be a public option. I know there's additional costs. But I see the tenor of the party going towards Medicare for all, and I wouldn't go in that direction.
All right, we're halfway home in the questionnaire. Number 7, should Joe Biden be the Democratic nominee for president in 2024, or should he step aside for a new generation of leaders?
I think Joe Biden is doing a great job considering the circumstances. I don't believe he is likely to be our standard bearer the next election. I don't necessarily think that that's the best course for us to take. I think we do need to look towards the next generation. There are talented people out there. We need to find them, grow them, bring them to the forefront. I would never say never. I mean, maybe there's a fountain of youth somewhere that just kind of gives him a new ability to emerge, and maybe that's the case. I don't see it. Someone in their, and it's not simply about age. There are physical realities, and if they someone who's in their mid 80s as president of the United States, I think it might be the right time to step aside and let someone else come forward. And it's not a judgment of Joe Biden. It's simply it's an observation of where he is and the timeline of life and responsibility.
Question number 8: what's the best Republican idea you've heard lately?
Creating the Environmental Protection Agency.
That was 1971, wasn't it?
So yes, there's been a gap, and can't wait to the next one.
You don't have to expand. That's fine. I'll totally accept that answer, and I thank you for the moment of levity there. Question number 9: could you ever see yourself supporting Andrew Cuomo in the future?
I certainly do not think Andrew Cuomo should be a public candidate for office anytime soon. Redemption is a part of our culture, and it's not for me to determine when and where he might achieve a level of redemption that makes him able to come back if he would want to, or if people would have him. But so my answer would be not now, and I can't predict the future. Forever's a long time.
What about Al Franken?
Yeah, I can see Al. I would support Al Franken. I think Al. I had a chance to meet him a couple of times, and I think he's a genuine person. He was not. There was no findings against him. I know there was some allegations, and and there's relevance to those allegations. But to say that he also is forever done, I think he's paid his penance. It's been a long time. I think he's a person of substance, and I think he has grown just based on the nature of who he is, that at least my understanding of him. So I would feel comfortable supporting Al Franken in the future.
Question number 10, have you ever, and ever covers a long time, have you ever had a dream or fantasy or imagined yourself as the President of the United States?
No, I kind of look at this job as it's I don't even understand why someone would want to be a governor these days. These are not. It's a tough, hard, thankless job, and so I think there's a way to play a role, and I'm finding that path for me. But it's one of the things I've always known is that you can't kind of see yourself as this one thing, and that how defines you. And so it's just more. Life is easier not to look in that light. Look away from the light.
Question number 11. What are your favorite sports teams?
Jets, Mets, and Knicks.
Jets, Mets, and Knicks. Well,
and of course,
one out of three ain't bad.
Right, and of course, I'm an Islanders fan because I live in Long Island, and we're all Islanders fans.
Okay, so you mentioned the Islanders, so I now have to ask a follow-up question, which is, how much of an Islanders fan are you? How serious a fan are you?
I support that. My passion is, I'm a Jets fan. I got season tickets when I was younger. I go to a lot of games. Knicks and Mets. Islanders. Hockey isn't my primary sport. I watch. I support them. I love to see them win. Doesn't mean I don't go to a Ranger game time and again. If I could, or a Yankee game or a Giant game for that matter. But yeah. So I follow them to the extent I can, and I enjoy watching the Islanders.
That's perfectly fine. I when this podcast began, I assumed that the Islanders would be the low-hanging fruit answer to that question. So I decided anybody who was going to say them, I was going to ask a couple of follow-up questions. Number 12, name your favorite political movie or TV show and why it resonated with you.
I would say the movie Missiles of October. And it's an old movie, but I just took I was in a course recently where we discussed it, and the decision-making process of groupthink and how they got to various decisions. And so to rewatch that movie from recently as opposed to the years, I don't know, many years ago, it really was a wonderful, wonderful movie, and just the history of it, and the Khrushchev making, the Kennedy deciding to ignore Khrushchev's, the first radical, wild response, and so let's pretend he never said the bad, and go right to the good. The more accommodating response. It was just brilliant. And so yeah, that was from TV shows. I watched like Fareed Zakaria maybe from a political news. I mean, he's a kind of, I like his approach to how he does things.
So that leads to question number. And by the way, I'm not familiar with the movie that you referenced. I'll have to give it a watch. It's not every day that somebody throws a fastball past me when it comes to political movies or TV shows. But that leads to question number 13, which is, my answer to that question would be The West Wing. I was a huge fan of.
I was going to say it's the Cuban Missile Crisis is what the Missiles of October was. It was a Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a more recent one, but that was just the one. But yeah, so you can see
that's great. I know some. I've done some reading and know some about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that certainly sounds great, and I would love to learn more. But as I was saying, my answer to the TV show question would be The West Wing, and there's a scene in the show where the president, played by Martin Sheen, wants to start speaking about issues on his mind, not caring about re-election and the impacts that it's going to have. And he says, this is more important than re-election, me being able to do this. This is more important than me keeping my office. What's more important to you than re-election? What's more important to you than winning an election? What's a key guiding light for you that If it was a choice between keeping your seat and following that light, there's no question you're following the light.
Yeah, I think that the great challenge when you're an official, especially an elected official, is again that balance between doing what you believe and trying to also represent. And it should be a constant struggle. And it's easy when they align. It's when they don't that becomes a challenge. And so where do we draw the line when we're going to take that position that is just untenable and there's no surviving it? And I suppose it's, we have those lines in the sand in terms of one's own dignity and honor, and I believe I'm a person of honor and substance. And so if there was a position that I simply could not fathom supporting, I would be okay with not winning. That when I was a town supervisor and I was the chief executive of this town, employees would come to me and say, they got another job and they'd be upset and they're leaving. And I would say, we're all leaving. We're all leaving at some point. You just happen to take a new job. You're leaving now. I might leave at the end of the next election. I might leave in a few years. I might, so it's not about being here. It's about what we do when we are here. And let's make the best of it and try to do good and be a professional. And there's a lot of different ways to talk about that. But I think that's where I would fall on that. And I think many others would as well. But it's how do I maintain my own sense of honor on an issue that just I can't transcend? And I can think of some, but I wouldn't want to just guess at some of those issues. It'd be very deep-seated and personal.
Jon Kaiman, how can we find you online or find you on social media to learn more about you and your campaign?
So it's Kaiman for Congress .com is my webpage. At Kaiman for Congress with a 4 in the middle. And I would say if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's info at Kaiman for Congress, and our campaign will respond, and we'd love to have people join us, get to know us better, and be part of our journey here. It's exciting, it's important, and we expect to do good things during the course of this journey.
And we will spell out those addresses on the tag to this program. We'll also have links available on the show's social media pages as well. Really appreciate this. Hope once everything gets resolved with the map that we can continue these conversations and maybe even have some one-on-one debates as we advance forward. But Jon Kaiman, Democratic candidate for Congress in the 3rd District of New York, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it was a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Andrew here again. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with candidate for Congress, Jon Kaiman. Now let's shift on to the ongoing drama over congressional district lines and the impact on the race for Congress in New York's 3rd District, as well as this podcast. As I've mentioned earlier, last week the Court of Appeals, the top court in New York State, ruled that the state's congressional district lines, as well as its state Senate lines, were drawn unconstitutionally and in violation of a 2014 state constitutional amendment that created an independent redistricting committee. The court ruled that the new maps violated that amendment and were, quote, drawn with impermissible partisan purpose. Now, I'm going to leave it to other podcasts to delve any deeper into that ruling. The ruling's impact, though, on New York's new 3rd District, as well as its race for Congress and this podcast, those are all ongoing concerns that we have to and will delve into. The court has appointed a special master to now redraw the congressional map once again. That new map, according to a later ruling, will be completed by May 20th. That's 2.5 weeks ahead of the release date of this episode. It also pushed back the primary date from June 28th to August 23rd, though the primary for governor and other races remains on June 28th, so now there's 2 primary days, at least in this current version of the court ruling. Now, because that initial ruling came from the top court in the state, the determination that the district lines are unconstitutional cannot be appealed, at least not in state court. There will be appeals in federal court that frankly aren't likely to overturn that ruling, but they could impact the decision to redraw the maps and delay the primary because of concerns about military members having enough time to cast ballots for both the primary and the general elections and do so in accordance with current federal law. We'll be monitoring any movement in those appeals and reporting them to you as we hear more. But pushing that aside, what will become of this new 3rd District map that we've all been operating under since February, and what happens after that? Well, most experts and observers believe that a new map drawn by the special master will be based on the current congressional map in the state, though districts are going to have to get a little bit larger in size because New York is still set to lose 1 seat in Congress once 2022 flips over to 2023. If that's the case, the expectation is that the special master's new New York 3 version 2 will probably look more like the current district, currently represented by Tom Suozzi. That district is much more of a Nassau County district than the current one. So the best guess, at least at this point, is that the special master may cut the Westchester, Suffolk, and Bronx portions out of a new New York 3, may reduce the Queens portion of the district, and may make the district cover more of Nassau County. Now, if that happens, we could see other candidates in other districts right now, like the 2nd and the 4th, become ineligible to run in those newly redrawn districts, and it could push some of those candidates into the race for a redrawn New York 3. That also means that some of the candidates, especially those not from Nassau, may get pushed out of the race. That means, in particular, State Senator Alessandra Biaggi, who is the only candidate in the field right now from Westchester and not from Nassau. We shall see. Now, if that happens, those new district lines will also cut me out of a redrawn New York 3. As I've mentioned many times, I live in downtown Portchester, the northernmost community in New York 3. In fact, my apartment is a 5-minute walk from the state line and from Greenwich, Connecticut. So if the special master just trims part of the Westchester portion of the district, I could very well be on the outside of the district looking in, even if Senator Biaggi is able to stay in the race. So what does that mean for the future of this, the 3 on NY3 podcast? I don't know yet, because I haven't seen the new map yet. But the ruling is already having something of a chilling effect on the race for Congress, and soon will have a similar chilling impact on this, the 3 on NY3 podcast. Candidates are already altering their schedules and geographic areas of focus because of the ruling. For example, we've been looking to host 2 candidates at a time for a series of one-on-one informal debates here on the podcast, and in fact, we had commitments from every candidate we've interviewed to participate. That is now on hold as campaigns wait to see how the district and the field of candidates are going to change once the special master issues a new map. And by the way, if I were working for any of the candidates in the field, I would agree with a more cautious approach pending the new map. A new map could change the politics of the district and which issues to emphasize. For example, a 3rd district without Westchester and the Bronx probably going to be more moderate and less progressive, leading candidates to emphasize positions on some issues and de-emphasize their positions on others. I mean, in reality, you have to know with whom you're speaking before you can determine what you're going to say to people. There's an additional question mark for the podcast presented by a new map, which is my access to the candidates. While I've never presented myself as a Westchester political journalist, and despite appearing on air for a decade on FiOS 1 News Long Island, in addition to FiOS 1 Hudson Valley, I'm aware that I'm better known for my reporting in Westchester, and more importantly, I'm seen by the Nassau-based candidates as being Westchester-based. Most candidates I've interviewed in the podcast, if you've noticed, have made specific Westchester references during interviews on the podcast for that reason. If Westchester is cut from the district, candidates may see less value in appearing on this podcast without any specificity as to where people are listening or watching. Something to be aware of. So what happens to 3 on NY3 now? First of all, the 9 episodes of the podcast and the 10.5 hours of candidate interviews that we've done so far, they're not going anywhere. They're going to remain online, available for you to watch and listen to until the 2022 general election in November and perhaps even longer. My aim in starting this was to create a library of material for voters to use for reference, to see how candidates vary their answers to my questions, and that shall remain. Also on the podcast, we've done special episodes aimed at getting to better know the disparate regions of the new district, as well as their voters and key issues. We've done an episode on Westchester and another one on Nassau. We were in talks with people who could provide similar insights into parts of New York 3 in the Bronx and Queens. Those are now on hold since we don't know which, if any, of those areas will be part of a newly redrawn New York 3. Similarly, the debates are on hold as well. The campaigns need to know which candidates remain in the race and what the district will look like before proceeding, so we're not going to schedule any debates until at least after we hear from the special master. Now, since 3 on NY3 launched a month ago, we've posted new episodes twice a week. That may have to be reduced in the days to come. Another reason you should subscribe to the podcast, so future episodes will come to you rather than having to wait and see if we're publishing on a particular Tuesday or Thursday. But I will be assembling some composite episodes in the days to come. And if you're wondering what that means, the campaigns may not have realized this, but I've covered a rather small pool of topics over this past month. Each candidate has responded to our 3 on NY3 Candidate Questionnaire, a set of 13 questions we asked of every candidate. On top of that, several candidates have chosen the same topics when asked to select their 2 topics to discuss with me on their episodes of the show. Climate change, for example, is one that's been discussed multiple times. And in the 20-minute segments that I've run featuring topics of my choosing, I've also often repeated topics: protecting the middle class, inflation in the economy, dealing with the GOP featuring the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just about every candidate has had to face questions from me on those subjects. So in the days to come, I'm going to assemble some compare and contrast clips, how some candidates answered the same questions when they appeared on the show. We'll turn some of those into future episodes you'll be able to listen into or watch, and we'll do that soon. Beyond that, watch this space. After we get a new map of the new New York 3, we'll reassess and see where the podcast will go next, if anywhere. As always, your thoughts and comments will be most appreciated, especially as we all face this unexpected fork in the road together, and I very much look forward to hearing from you. And that brings us just about to the close of this episode of 3 on NY3. My thanks to Jon Kaiman and his campaign team. To learn more about Jon and his campaign, you can find him at KaimanForCongress.com. That's Kaiman, the word for, F-O-R, Congress.com. Jon's Twitter handle is at KaimanForCongress. That's at Kaiman, the number 4, Congress. My name is Andrew Whitman. Think of the poet. That'll get you halfway there on the spelling. You can follow the show on Twitter. The show's handle is 3 on NY3. Mine is at Whitman Andrew. Video versions of the podcast are available on YouTube. Audio streams can be found on all major podcast hosting apps. Just search for 3 on NY3. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever and however you're consuming it, and tell a friend. To contact the show with questions, complaints, gardening tips, whatever, email the show at 3onny3@gmail.com. Primary day was June 28th. It's now August 23rd and could change further. Election day is November 8th. That ain't changing. This has been 3 on NY3 with Andrew Whitman. Bye-bye for now.